Hello, welcome to another episode of the Cool Tools Show and Tell. Our special guest this week is Chris Butler. Hey Chris, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. I'm Chris Butler. I live in Oakland, California. I've been a longtime fan. I also have the completely oversized book on my shelf. Not here because I'm not at home right now, but really big fan. I guess if I were to use one way to describe myself is I tend to call myself the chaotic good product manager. And the reason for that is actually twofold. So I'm a group product manager in Google's core machine learning group. But the chaotic good is just meant to say that I guess I think a lot about the way that we kind of increase randomness or chaos, or even just this idea of trying to channel more from the source for us to be able to come up with ideas. And I just finished Rick Rubin's creator book, so that's why source is like a top of mind terminology for me. But so chaotic good also points to the fact that I used to play Dungeons and Dragons a lot. I still actually play a lot of role-playing games. I'm just actually finishing up a module for something called Mothership right now. And so it's meant to be kind of this kind of a Easter egg for people that are geekier. They'll see chaotic good as the alignment within a Dungeons and Dragons game. But I also mean it when I look at my work, I try to do what's best for us, but also in a way that maybe injects some more interesting things into the world.
Okay, that's really great. So chaotic good.
Exactly.
Maybe some of that will sprout in our conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So Chris, tell us about one of your favorite tools.
Yeah. Well, so the first one that I wanted to bring up is it's a deck of cards. And I know you've had lots of people with deck of cards. I actually have a bunch of other decks of cards here, like oblique strategies, like you've had on a couple times, I think. Things like tarot deck.
Brian, knows.
Yeah.
Little just to let people know who don't, oblique strategies is a little prompting for being creative when you're stuck. Right. So
they're like 60 provocations is the right way to think about it, right? Yeah.
Right. So your deck of cards, if you hold them up again,
sure.
They have different colors.
Yeah. And kind of the way that you end up playing this game, if people are familiar with something called planning poker, it's used inside of the tech world that if we're trying to decide how hard a particular item that we want to work on would be, how complex it might be, what we do is we actually all, between developers, designers, product managers, anybody else that might be part of the process, we all kind of think to ourselves a number. And so in the case of planning poker, it could be just, in this case, delegation poker, it's 1 to 7. It could be the Fibonacci sequence. I think the best ones I've seen are basically 0, 1, and no idea, basically.
I'm not following you.
Sure.
You think of a number. What are you going to do with this number? Why are you thinking of a number?
Yeah. So when you think about the number, it's like how hard or complex the item is. And then we all basically either put down a card that represents the number, so 1, down at the same time.
So again, you're going really fast for me.
Sorry.
You have a bunch of people working on a project together, a team of some sort, and you're all going to rank or assign a number to the difficulty. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the difficulty, the complexity, or the size of a particular work item, and we're all sitting around
a work item. Is this a problem? You mean
Yeah, I guess when we think about it, the work that I do inside the tech world, we try to solve really big problems for people.
Sure.
But then there's amount of work that's in some range of a couple hours to a couple days worth of work for an engineer. We want to talk about is it actually a couple hours, a couple days, or actually a couple weeks, right? So length of time could be a way to talk about this, right?
Right.
Everybody puts down their cards at the same time, and it's not interesting when everybody agrees.
And the card is a proxy for the amount of estimating.
That's right. So some people will do pure estimation. I think when we talk about people that are both technical, like engineers, and non-technical people, it's actually very hard for a non-technical person to do an estimate. So we tend to think about just complexity or difficulty, or just how big do we think this item is? And so what's interesting is that between all the different people that have laid down their cards, we didn't talk beforehand, right? We just put down a number that we thought represented the complexity or the difficulty.
Right.
And what we want to look for is actually differences of opinion. Okay. Because if, for example, one person puts down a 1 and one person puts down a 10, that means that we have a very different concept in our head of what this work item is. And so this is referred to as planning poker inside the tech world. Now, delegation poker.
Again, you're going really fast for me.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
So what's the benefit of a card versus just putting down number down on a piece of paper?
Either way works. The cards just tend to be a physical thing, so you can hold them. That's why they call it poker. is because it's more like you're not telling everybody else what the card is that you're going to put down. And so I was kind of showing my hand as like a folded out set of cards, like you would like when you're holding a set of poker cards, essentially. That's right.
Okay, but you could just everybody write down a piece number on a piece of paper.
That's right. Yeah, or you could throw out your hand, like number of fingers.
Okay. All right.
There's tools like Miro also have ways to do that actually inside the
but
the
and you were saying it was a game. Where's the game part?
No, so it's not a game. It's actually used to help build alignment between a team of cross-functional people that are building something, essentially.
Right.
And so that's planning poker.
Everybody puts the number down. You have one person said 1, one person said 5, one person said 7, one person said 3.
Yeah.
Then what happens?
Well, so what we look for is if everybody put down different numbers, we should now have a discussion about why we all think it's the number that we put down. So if a person put down 1, they probably think, oh, this is really easy. This is not a lot of complexity. It's something we could just do like within an hour. Person puts a 10 down, maybe they're like, no, this is going to take like weeks to do appropriately. And so what you want to look for is kind of a difference in opinion and way that those different people are thinking about the problem, essentially. So that's planning poker. When we talk about delegation poker, this is like an evolution of that. And we do this, though, to be able to talk about, like, how is it that between you and I, like, say you're my manager and I'm your employee, how much ownership I should take over this, or how much I should be working with you on that? And so the 7 cards, right, and I'm going to read them off. There's 7 different levels here inside the delegation poker, which are all different colors of the rainbow. If I put down a 1, it's that basically I will, I will tell them what to do, right? So you as the manager, if you put down 1, that means that you're just going to tell me exactly how to do it. And if I put down 1, it means I want you to tell me exactly how to do it. Number 2 is like sell. Like if you were the manager and you put down 2, it'd be like, I'm going to try to sell you, but really you're going to kind of do it my way, and vice versa. Like if I put down a 2, it's like, I want you to really just tell me mostly how to do it, but maybe ask for my opinion. And that goes all the way from 4, which is kind of the middle ground. And middle ground is agree, which is really like, we're going to come together and just build a consensus on how we should work on this, essentially. And then finally, 7 is basically, I want you to delegate this. So like, if you were the manager, it would mean that you're just going to like, you're going to say, yeah, here's the task, you go do, or here's even the problem. You go do whatever you need to do this. I don't even want to hear about what the outcome is. You're just going to go do it. And vice versa. Like, I just want you to let me go and run with this, right? And so what's interesting, again, using that poker dynamic, is that if I'm sitting in a room between a manager and an employee and we put down vastly different cards, that's a really important conversation to have. And so again, it's not a game, it's more of a technique to be able to get at like misalignment. But I've also done this when I was a consultant at a company called Philosophy, which was like innovation and design consulting. We would use this with our clients. And so what we'd come up with is we'd say, for example, let's say there's a scenario where we need to change the color of a button in like a user interface or something like that. We would then ask them, like, do you care that much? Like, is this you should only tell me the actual color, or is it delegate, just do whatever you think is best and don't even tell me? But we'd also then ask other scenarios, like, well, so what if we try to identify a different customer, right? Or what if we try to solve a different problem, or we have a different strategy? And so you end up having like a whole list of these scenarios, and I'm happy to share like a list of scenarios that I've put together for this type of thing, but it really helps. I guess when we like a lot of things I think about is how do people work better together? And so this gets kind of all the gunk out of assumptions that we have about the way we should work with each other. And so this is by a group called Management 3.0. And they have a lot of other cool stuff. They have like improv cards, they have like blank cards, a bunch of stuff like that. But I found this to be really effective, especially when like talking to new teams. I haven't done it with like a manager, but I've done it a lot in consulting, where we want to make sure the client is getting what they want, basically, and to be interacted with the way they want to be, right? Because nothing kills a project more than like me going off and doing something and the client's, no, you should not have done that, basically.
And how come we haven't done it as a manager? How come we don't use them as a manager?
Well, so I think that in a lot of the places that I've worked, this type of facilitation stuff feels weird to people. Like I would say inside of Google, for example, getting people to do like regular retrospectives, some of the tools I'll show you today, like even the oblique strategy cards, like if I pull those things out, people think I'm insane.
Really?
So, like, yeah, well, I mean, it depends on the team, of course. Like there's lots of different people inside of Google, but I would just say like the teams I work with, they tend to be very technically minded, especially if they're like engineers, like really hardcore machine learning engineers. And this may be related to the fact that why do we do these things is because they create confusion. like temporary confusion for us. And the problem is that engineers, people that are more literal minded, that are really all about certainty, they can only take so much confusion. For people like the designers I would work with, like I could use any oblique strategy card and they would just like be able to match it to whatever it was we were working on, because they love lots of confusion, right? Like more confusion means more options in some ways.
Is this your good chaos?
Exactly. So I'm always trying to like push the limits of like what is enough confusion in this situation, because when we have confusion, we try to now like create something new, right? And that's really amazing, I think, in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay, so these are Delegation Poker. Is that what you called them?
That's right, Delegation Poker, and they're by a group called Management 3.0.
Okay.
And you can get them. I can't remember the exact price I paid. I think it was like $30 or $40 for like a set. But I have like a bunch of these, and I've left them with clients as well afterwards, and they've really loved them. Yeah.
Delegation Poker. Okay. Yeah. So there's 7 levels: tell, sell, consult, agree, advise, inquire, and delegate.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
suppose
And so
if you were really cheap, you could make your own.
yeah, you know what? They also, I think, sell PDFs of this.
Yeah.
So actually, I got the cost kind of off. It's actually only €8 for a full set.
Okay.
And I think I end up getting, let's see how many versions I get. I think I get about 5 hands worth. So you can have a discussion between 5 people.
Great.
But like I said, you can use this technique just by writing things down. But I find the cards, the physicality, because they describe like on each card what it actually means, it makes it much easier for people to understand.
Right.
In some ways.
Your hand holding.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Because, you know, when we deal with people in like corporate America, like at very large organizations that don't like hired us to be innovative, right? Like they're giving us a little bit of permission to push the limits of what they usually do. And so we got to take baby steps sometimes to allow them to do that. Yeah.
Right. That's great. Okay. So the Delegation Poker cards.
Yeah.
Chris, what's a second tool that you really like these days?
So one that I've really been kind of excited by recently is this thing called the Work Kit of Design Fiction, which is by the Near Future Laboratory. And I think the newest edition is $65. This is the last year's edition that I have, but I think mostly what changes is kind of the art between the cards. But maybe what like would be helpful to describe first is what is design fiction. Okay, design fiction is kind of this idea that when we're ever trying to understand what our values are today, you know, like what do we think is actually good? What do we think is bad? Where do we want technology to go in some way? Design fiction is this idea that we're going to jump into this old janky time machine. We're going to go like 20, 30 years in the future. But we're not going to go to like the shiny, you know, white walls, everything's glass, everything's like transparent displays for some reason, which sounds horrible for usability, but like all these like really beautiful envisionings of the future world with technology, which is usually like Samsung marketing materials, right? But then there's the opposite, which usually shows up in science fiction, which is like dystopia. And it's usually like cyberpunk, like all those different genres end up being like very much about like the worst case scenario. What this is this more about like the middle road. It's like if I were to get into this like time machine, right? Go 23 years in the future. And I'm working on a project with the Near Future Laboratory about kind of what would be the employee manual of the future be. So when you join a company, what does the employee manual look like? So imagine that I get in a time machine, go 20 years in the future, I pop into someone's office cubicle and there's like an employee manual sitting there. And I like grab it and then I go back in time and we look at that thing. And that thing is actually like, it tries to talk about a lot of things that are not just the idea of like surprising, right? It is meant to make you kind of look at this and go like, oh, that's what's going on here. Why is it this way? Maybe even like be a little surprised and like laugh and be interested in like the absurdity of the mundaneness, right? And so a good example of this and so Julian Bleecker is like one of the founders of the Near Future Laboratory. He's one of the people that created these cards. He uses an example of like a cereal box that's from the future, where there's a cricket on the front and it's called like cricket oats or something like that. And the question is like, well, so why is there a cricket on the front? And it says there's like a special barcode for like scanning this. And it says like, you know, I think it says like bug proteins. And so it's about this like idea that in the future, it's common for cereal, like a bug protein is so common that it's just like kid cereals.
Right.
And like Minority Report, which is another, you know, movie with, you know, Tom Cruise, there's a point where he has like a talking, singing like cereal box that breaks and doesn't turn off. You just like throw it across the room. That prototype, that design fiction is kind of talking about that, like in this world, technology displays, processors are so ubiquitous that is on literally a disposable item, right? And they don't always work, and that's kind of accepted in some way. And so it tells you something about the future that we're imagining. It tries to get us to like say, is that actually a future we want or not? But it's not meant, again, it's not about utopia or dystopia, which I would argue utopia and dystopia is just like, utopia is my rules are in effect. Dystopia are that your rules are in effect, right?
Right.
So anyways, the design fiction work kit, what it does is it basically, it uses a methodology. There's another card deck called the Thing from the Future, which kind of did this, but it takes like 5, I think, different categories. And you're supposed to draw one from each one of these categories. So I'm holding up like the first one is tone. Okay. And so you're supposed to draw one of these, each of these things. And so it's like action, which is the thing that you're going to be doing. There's an attribute, which is kind of, you know, it's like an additional attribute just to add to the mix of these things. There's the object itself, like what is the thing that we're talking about? There's something called an archetype, which in design fiction means how are we talking about this item? So it's not, I think a lot of people when they first doing design fiction, they actually try to explain like an app and they talk about all the functionality of the app, right? What we're talking about here is like, it's like the movie, it's like the review of the app that we're actually building here. And that's
Right.
the archetype, is like a review on an app store.
Right.
And then the final thing is the tone, which is kind of like, how should it feel? And so like, you know, it just gives you some examples here. Like some of the like actions might be like gamifying something or protesting something or diagnosing something. Those are actions you would need to do with this object. And then when it comes to attributes, it might be like autonomous. And I'm holding it up like autonomous has like this kind of art around like Terminator, of course. Try not to be too dystopian most of the time. Or ambiguous. And this is like a David Bowie kind of a icon. Handcrafted, right?
These are all some of the options for attributes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you then, out of these 5 different sets, you draw one from each type.
Right.
And so like, let's do that right now. I'll just draw right now. We can maybe riff on like a design fiction.
While you're getting ready, let me just interject that I was on the team that worked on the design fiction for Minority Report.
Oh, wow, cool.
And lots of our ideas made it into the movie. And you're right, that's exactly what it is. I call this thing that's not utopia and not dystopia. I call it protopia.
Yeah, exactly.
This thing in the middle, which is a little bit better than today, but not by much.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you kind of muddle towards this view. So you're trying to make it kind of a realistic view where things are a little bit better, but not by much.
That's right.
And the genius of Steven Spielberg, the director of the Minority Report, was he was kind of doing what the cards were doing. He did it naturally without cards.
Yeah, sure.
But he would get, you know, a bunch of future-oriented people like myself were in the room. And if you ask him about the future thing, we do these kind of hand-waving things. He says, no. I want these specific things.
Yeah.
I want to know the bed. What does the bed look like? What do people have for breakfast? You know, what kind of music do they actually listen to in the evening? So it was very, very specific. And I don't think that a lot of us had ever been asked those kind of questions before.
Yeah.
And so that specificity is actually very important in kind of drawing it out and making it real in a certain way.
Yeah. Because we can then start to talk about like the externalities of this thing.
Right.
Like once it's a box, we can say, well, this box now has to be purchased from somewhere, right? It has to be used. It has to be maybe thrown away or recycled or whatever, right? Yeah. So anyways, Minority Report comes up for a lot of different reasons when it comes to even the UX, right? Like, although Gorilla Arm is a thing where you can't keep your hands up for that long, Tom Cruise is very in shape to be able to do that type of thing, right? But so actually, like Julian Bleecker, you know, he spent some time with like Bruce Sterling at Art Center. And so this idea of like, what is a design fiction kind of came out of those discussions, right? And so they also call them diegetic prototypes, but it's meant to be that you don't know fully what is going on and that it's supposed to be surprising and then make you ask questions about that. So I think that's awesome. I mean, anyways, Minority Report is an amazing example of that type of thing. So in this one, what we got a carbon-based CPG, so consumer packaged good, that is forbidden, that is deep faking something, and it's a social media ad for it. Okay, so the archetype is a social media ad. So like if I were to start kind of like brainstorming some of these things, right? And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you have one you want to go with first, or
No. Go ahead, keep going.
So like maybe one of the things that you might find in like the deeper, darker parts of like the Facebook of the future is essentially this idea of, I'm trying to think, it's like maybe an additive to your fuel, right? It's a CPG type of thing. It's about carbon-based issues. But what it does is it makes your fuel actually not look like fuel when it comes out of a tailpipe. And so this is like a social media ad about like, have you not been able to afford the latest EV? So now let's make your car at least not smell like a regular like fossil fuel burning car. And so this is an additive you end up adding to your gas, right? And so the social media ad maybe talks about like, I was never able to get like, I can imagine some guy with like a hot rod. He's like, I was never able to get a date to actually like go out with me more than once because they knew I still had a carbon-based car. But now, I'm able to get away with it. Something like that, right? And you can even go further than that, right? But that's the point of these, is that I think like I've done things from the future. I've done these. And if I'm thinking about like a future world, like that one about the employee manual, there's a lot of discussion about the idea of like, what does it mean? And I actually have another deck of cards by the Ready, which is all about like tensions and practices inside of organizations.
What was that? What's that one called?
It's by the Ready, which is like a organizational consulting group.
Aaron Dignan.
Yeah, and so practice and tension is about things that happen inside of the organizations. So I'll mix those cards with these cards, and then what we end up. And by the way, there was one time I just like used every card deck I had, and we had like 15 cards. It was unmanageable, but what we start to do is we start to then create a bunch of these objects, right? So like inside the world that I'm thinking about for like the employee manual is that, there's this real tension between the fact that everybody should be replaceable, right? And that's job role descriptions, ladders, the way you get promoted is all about replaceability versus this like embodied unique experience that I have. And so which of those ends for different things ends up happening in this future? And if we start talking about like the future of AI, like digital twins are a thing where, once you work somewhere, you work there for forever because your digital twin is available to everybody there. So we think like the Futurama Hall of Presidents with all the different like presidents' heads and stuff like that. And so that plus like one of the things that came out of one of these discussions was like, what does it mean for an organization's office to actually change based on the stance of that organization? So like, are we in wartime or peacetime? Like, are we learning or exploring, or are we like executing? Mm-hmm. And what does that do to the workplace? Like, what would you do to actually change that? So I use these cards and doing like working sessions with a group of people where we'll create, over the course of an hour, right? For people that are used to this type of thing, we can do 2 to 3 rounds, 5 to 7 people. Everybody kind of like says in a 30-second, like, so we'll be able to come up with like tens of ideas that then end up just being like these things, and you don't have to use them, but they end up kind of creating a possible future. And then I try to, as like the showrunner in this particular project, I try to pick out particular objects that I think make sense, that are really trying to drive the kind of thematic points home that we're trying to talk about in this thing. Right. So yeah. And so then the employee manual itself is actually this printout, and we're imagining something like a 3-ring binder. But the thing that's weird about it is that it's some of it is generated just for you, based on what your digital twin would want, right? Or think about. And so anyways, that's how I use these cards. But I think it's like, I've used them also with like user experience teams, to be able to start talking about like, what is the future of machine learning, and what would actually making machine learning accessible to everybody? What would be some things that would start to happen then, based on like the diegetic prototype that we create with the design fiction?
Yeah.
So that's how I use them.
Yeah. Versions of this exist in various levels. Like Amazon was famous for demanding that when they began developing some new item or product, that they write the press release.
That's right.
For the item, what that little headline and that little thing that you sent out to the newspapers would, and that you began there, and that kind of idea of beginning at the end is something we did at Wired too, which
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
start with what the cover says and the headline, and then
That's so
work
cool.
backwards because you're going to have to write the headline eventually. You're going to have to write the press release eventually. And you find that the writing of it is clarifying to what the invention is or
Yeah.
what the thing you're trying to make. And that kind of starting at the end and working backwards is actually very powerful.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit what the cards are
Yeah.
doing in some ways.
Yeah. And I've written an article about how I think design fiction should help us inform the way we do better PR FAQs, because that was something we experimented with inside of Google and one of my teams, the teams I'm on. And I think one of the problems with the PR is it ends up being a very polished, like
Yeah.
press version of this, right?
Sure.
It's the comms output.
Right.
One of the things I've modified, right, is I've actually done one where it was actually the press release while it was being drafted, and so it was all the comment threads inside of the press release. So like, what is like the PR person actually like trying to get clarification from the product team about,
Right.
and like where are they like kind of putting the shine on things versus not being real. Another one was like, I think of, because we build a lot of tools that are for internal Google like use, like what is the employee newsletter that was forwarded from one VP to another, and what's the commentary they add on top of this, right? And so I love that idea of PR FAQs. I just think we need to push it further, right? And so like pushing it further means that we need to include some of the externalities, or like, to your point, the protopia rather than, I think it's usually the utopia is what ends up being written. Because when I've worked with Amazon people, they have very specific like formulas the way they do it. It's not exactly design fiction, but I agree with you that there's like, that is a humongous. My whole thing about product managers is that we're basically just fiction writers, because we write specifications about something that doesn't exist yet. They just happen to be like really boring fictions, unfortunately. And so I guess that's what I keep on trying to push people to do, is to do more interesting fictions in some way.
So going back to the tool, the cool tool, is the design fiction.
That's right.
Kit. I think it's called the work kit of design fiction. And it's a set
$65.
Yeah, $65. And for that, you get all these prompted 5 different, I guess, categories of prompting cards.
That's right.
That you have different combinatorial.
And there's instructions. So there's like the classic instruction card that comes with every deck of cards. There's also like I think one other interesting set of cards that are part of this is that there's this like 70-20-10 that they talk about, where like, you know, and so I use these, by the way, is that if I want to like add a bit more tone to it, I draw one of these 3 randomly. And so one of them is like, oh, amazing. You know, it's surpassed or wow's expectation. Everybody loves it, right? Or it's a complete disaster, right? Like the CEO had to resign, your stock options have been revoked, got a good recruiter, ? And then the middle one is like, meh, it's okay, right? We'll probably end up in the junk drawer in a month. And so I think this adds a little bit more flavor too, but these are another part of the card deck that you get. But and it comes in a nice kind of, I really hate the fact that a lot of card decks come in these like super flimsy, and I'm holding up like a Rider Tarot deck, which is basically almost disintegrated at this point because it goes in my backpack a lot of places. The design fiction one is, I appreciate a good sturdy case, and I would say that the oblique strategies are another one of those. That comes in a good case, basically.
Okay, and looking at their site now, it says there also is a book.
The Manual of Design Fiction.
How is it necessary? Is it useful?
No, so I love the book. Like, I think I'm kind of a new person to this community. There's a Near Future Laboratory Discord that I'm part of, and I'm running this kind of project as part of this hyper collaborative that we're doing there. But I'm pretty new to the thing, maybe a year or so. And so the Manual for Design Fiction, I think, is a really great book overall to help describe and talk through it. It's not a book that I think you need to like rush through or anything like that. That's something that someone else has talked to Julian about, but I think it helps, definitely. Like, if you can understand the kind of reason and why we should be doing these type of future things. Usually, if I was doing this as a workshop, I would spend about 5 or 10 minutes doing the spiel that I gave you, plus some extra things. If you're going to do it solo, I would say the Manual of Design Fiction is really helpful to help kind of set the way that you should be using these things, basically.
Well, great.
But it's a great book. Yeah.
Really, really fabulous. Great idea. And I'm a fan of cards as well. So,
cool.
this will fit in. So, So, Chris, how about another tool that you are
Yeah.
excited by?
So I've been thinking an awful lot about like decision making as part of this project called the Uncertainty Project, which is an online community for like decision making and strategy. And so there's a really interesting tool called the Decider, which is by Noble, which is another kind of organizational consulting group. Essentially, this is a website that if you ever are trying to make a decision about something, it allows you to kind of click through. It asks a bunch of questions because there's actually, if you look at the very bottom here of the web page, there's 8 different types of decision making kind of ways to make decisions. And so, just for me to describe them really quickly, autocratic is really just like one person needs to make this decision. It's probably the boss, right, in some way. Avoidant is that we should, not make this decision right now. We should put it off until some future time. Consensus, this is that everybody on the team needs to agree in some way, that everybody has to actually agree. And it's something that I think like a lot of large organizations like Google, I think actually do a lot of. Consent, which I think is a very interesting way, is actually focused a lot on veto. So like not everybody has to agree, but it's if anybody vetoes, then we can't do this decision. So it's a kind of the opposite way of consensus is the way I think about it. Consultative is really just like trying to get as much of a kind of understanding of people. I think one thing that's interesting about this is that I still think of consultative as something that you should be doing in a lot of decisions anyways. And I think there's actually, and I've written an article about this, but like I think there's a big there should be a separation where right when we know we need to make a decision, we should decide how we're now going to decide, which I think this tool is helpful for.
Okay. So there's 8. There's a couple
Yeah.
more varieties.
Yeah. Well, my favorite one, by the way, is stochastic. So if you don't have enough information, just flip a coin. and there's a lot of interesting things about that.
And what's the idea of this website?
Yeah. So if we were to like say have to make a decision about something, I'll press the start button here, and then it asks some questions. Like first question, is this an urgent decision? So like let's say that we were trying to make a very urgent decision. Right
So
now, so we'll say yes.
is this thing trying to help you decide what kind of decision, what of the 8
That's right.
varieties that you're trying to make?
That's right. So it tries to funnel you to one of those and then give you a bunch of information about that.
Right.
So like
So this tool will help you craft the kind of decision that you want to make for the given situation that you have.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's like I call it deciding how to decide. But I think, so like the next question is, does this decision impact a large number of people? So let's say yes.
Right.
Can you delay the decision to gather more feedback? No. And so in this case, it recommended consent decision making.
Okay.
And so what you can see here on the screen is that not only does it give you kind of an overview of a couple different attributes of this decision-making process, but like it's probably a little bit faster. It is more collaborative rather than independent. It is more egalitarian rather than hierarchical. And then finally, it is very transparent and not very private, right? And so for this thing, it then talks about like, as I said, it's basically like no one objects or vetoes this decision. Right. And then gives you kind of a list of pros and cons, and then talks about the process by which you might actually then take on this decision.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And so and then common traps, of course, which I think is really interesting as well.
Good. So the idea is there's twofold. One is it helps you decide how to decide, and then two, it can educate you on how to decide better or how to make the better choices.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is that they not only have the site, but they also have a Slack plugin. Okay. So you can actually ask it inside of a Slack channel if you wanted to, which I think is really great.
It seems to be like just a free website, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's free. I think the thing I've found really helpful about this is, you can go here, but I think it's also, as you start using this a little bit more, you start to get, I think, more expert at deciding how to decide, right? Which is, I think, something that lacks an awful lot inside of the groups that I work with a lot, is that we end up just like kind of having a default mode for deciding. And so this at least tries to usher you in a direction that might be a better way to decide for that particular type of decision.
That's really great. So, and that's called The Decider.
Yeah, that's right. It's called The Decider.
The Decider.app.
Yep, that's right.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you for that tool. So, Chris, I think you have a fourth tool for us.
Yeah, I do. Well, this one is called the Flipper Zero. And you can see here, it's kind of like a small white plastic device with like a very cutesy dolphin in the LCD screen.
Big orange button.
A big orange button and trackpad, and then a back button, essentially. The other things you should notice about this device, though, is that there's an infrared port here. There is a USB-C.
Right. And it's about the
There's
size of a pack of cards.
Yeah, it's about the height of a pack of cards, I would
Yeah.
say. Like it's the thickness of a pack of cards.
Right.
And then the height of maybe two packs of cards.
Right.
And yeah, and then there's a GPIO, so kind of like how you might have with like Arduino or other types of devices that take hats or other types of like modification devices. And there's also something called like an I button access, which are these like little metal prompts right here. The thing that's really interesting about this is that I guess technically it's a hacking device. So that's the thing that you should maybe think about it as. I've actually like wiped this to default kind of the firmware that comes with it, which has restrictions on it. But I think the thing that is you can't see on here so much is that it can actually do sub gigahertz kind of sensing and sending and receiving essentially.
Wait,
And
wait,
so
wait. Let's
yeah,
slow down a little bit. Um,
sure,
so it's those are communicate. It can communicate,
that's right.
but
Yeah,
but the thing that it's doing,
yeah.
what is it doing? What?
So I guess it's up to the user. So what I would say is that one of the things that you can do with this, like let's start talking about some applications, right? So one of the things I can do is that through this infrared port, it has a bunch of default software that allows it to act as a universal remote. So if you've ever done anything like TV Be Gone, if you've ever heard of that,
No.
if you ever wanted to create your own remote based on a bunch of different IR remotes,
Okay.
it can not only look at that remote signal, but it can also replay it. And you can then create custom remotes inside of here. So that's one thing it can do.
All right.
The sub gigahertz thing, what that means is like near field, like NFC type of stuff or RFID types of
Uh-huh.
things. It can not only read those, but it can also then mimic them or simulate them.
Okay.
And then a bunch of other things as well. So like garage door openers, the fob for your key, like your car.
All
There's
right.
some security things that keep this from this actually doing this, but it can sense it. So really anything that uses kind of sub gigahertz, and there's a lot of different signals that are inside of there, can start to do some really interesting things around that.
Does it do Bluetooth as well
Yeah, it does Bluetooth as well.
and
And so
Wi-Fi?
yeah, so Wi-Fi is not, it doesn't do Wi-Fi. You can buy a separate hat, which is called
Okay.
like one of them is called the Marauder. And that allows you, there's one that also includes GPS. So then you can start doing something that's called war driving, where you're able to like Wi-Fi war driving is essentially you're driving around to detect the location of different Wi-Fi networks,
Right.
essentially.
So what's an example of something you have used it for?
Yeah. So I've used it definitely because remotes are constantly being lost in my household. I'm able to like actually, and we have like multiple devices. Like I have a bunch of kids. The Apple TV device remote is small enough to be able to fit in places that are very hard to find later. So that's maybe less of an example because it's more of a Bluetooth example,
Yeah.
but like the TV one is another one that gets lost all the time. Right. And so I've actually created my own remote for this type of thing.
Right.
I think another thing is that like cloning like your garage door opener thing.
Yeah.
That's another one that I've used it for.
Okay.
And these are all kind of like, up and up things. They're all things that I own. You could go around and if you wanted to turn off the TV in like an airport, like a TV Be Gone, you can do that with this type of thing. It also has like an app platform. And it's kind of a Tamagotchi. So this dolphin that you saw earlier, there's like a whole kind of thing about this dolphin doing things and being the mascot for it. So it's a little cutesy as well. I guess I always maybe one other thing that I think is really interesting is there's something called Bad USB, which there's a Ducky by this other company called Hack5. But basically it's that if I were to take this, say a USB and plug this thing into a device, I can have it actually mimic a keyboard and then take actions on that device. And so the joke ones might be something like, basically what it will do is it will spawn a terminal, like I'm on a Mac right now, it will spawn a terminal and then do something to create like basically a command. And so one of the things is that it can actually, like the joke one is like rickrolling someone. So I could go up to their computer, plug this in, send this over. It will, in the background, like create a terminal, run all of this script, and then when they get back on their computer later, it will rickroll them. as you can imagine, there's a lot of other things that this type of USB device can do. And so there's a whole library of things that are out there. But I would say like for people that are doing like penetration testing, if they're doing like security audits, like any of that type of thing, this is one of those things you can kind of bring around. Now there's lots of, I just want to be very clear. I just think this is like a really cool device. When I saw Terminator 2 and I wanted to be like John Connor with like the ATM machine, I always love these types of devices. And I have like another one, which is like a watch for like Wi-Fi cracking and stuff like that. And so I just love these types of devices. It just feels cool and fun. And I've been able to teach some of my kids about like, what does it mean like when we talk about infrared? What does it mean when we talk about these other things? So they also have, I've tried to teach them how to pick locks as well, if you can imagine. But like, I mean, I'm one of those people, I guess the chaotic good product manager. I used to make red boxes when I was in high school, and I went to 2,600 meetings. And actually, that's one of the things that I think is really funny is because this is like an app platform, there's actually a DTMF player as well. So
I don't know what DTMF is.
So it's just, I forget what the exact acronym is, but it's basically like when we used to have signaling from a phone where we were pressing digits and it would make a tone, essentially. Not rotary, where it was more about clicks, and that was a different type of mechanism.
Push button.
Yeah, exactly, push button. And so like what you can have here is you can actually have like I'm just showing like the app, which is like the dialer.
Okay.
Right. And so I don't know if it's going to come through here, but can you hear that at all? I don't know if my noise cancellation. The thing that's really cool is that like I have also a Redbox one. So you can see here that it will simulate like putting a nickel, dime, or quarter into a payphone as of like, again, this is like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, when you could find a payphone. When was the last time you saw a payphone? When
you could find a payphone that would actually take quarters and then actually use this type of system. So I used to make Redboxes a very long time ago out of Radio Shack phone dialers. And then Hallmark cards started to have things where they would replay sounds. And so we went to that inside of a Radio Shack enclosure because it was easier to actually build that than to like buy a $20 like Radio Shack like dialer thing. So anyways, I just think like stuff like this is really cool to me because it's just like fun. And actually another thing that's really funny is that like I guess the question is always like, will it actually play Doom? And you can see here that like it can. It's not very good. Like if you play it, it's like very ASCII version of this type of thing. But it's Doom. And so, but I love this because I think also for me, like I said, I think there's a lot of cases where when we get locked into certain types of devices where we don't know what like the remote is. This is one of those things where you don't have to go and buy that like expensive remote anymore. You can just find out what is the way that this works and then build your own, right? You can find other devices that will be stronger when it comes to IR, absolutely. You can also find specialty IR devices that do different things. But I just love like the versatility of this and the coolness of it is I think the way that I would put it.
Right. Cool. So again, that's called, the name of that again?
The Flipper Zero.
The Flipper Zero.
Yeah, I'm just looking up if one of the problems was that because they were so you cannot
$169.
Yeah, if it's assembled. And then so like the one problem was that apparently like some of the shipments were being stopped. And it was because of the fact that like these things, like if in certain cases, you should not be accessing certain types of radio frequencies. And so in the firmware that this ships with, it has restrictions on when and what types of things you can do. Now, if you go and look on the internet, there are a bunch of GitHub repos that are alternative firmwares that do not have that restriction. And so that's what I'd say. But it's like, there's just like, I love the idea of developer communities that are around these things. That kind of like hacker ethos of like, I can figure out what's going on with this thing. It makes it, it's not always the easiest tools to use in comparison to other types of like, say like IR or other types of like things. But I could like, the other thing I could do here is I could clone my employee badge, for example. Now there's a bunch of other reasons why I would need to have my actual badge there because I'd need to show it. But there's some interesting things like that. So anyways, I just think it's really cool and it's really fun. There's a great developer community around it as well. So that's kind of the Flipper Zero.
Flipper Zero. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for those. Those are very, very invigorating, inspiring choices things I didn't know about. Thank you again for
Yeah, you're welcome.
letting us know about them and for volunteering. So tell us about, is there a project you're working on that you
Yeah.
want to share, or a passion that you have, or something that you would like to take this opportunity to tell us about?
I mean, I guess I've been starting to think about my career as like an octopus. And so there's a lot of like tentacles that are all doing their own thing. And sometimes they assemble into something that's like centralized. But the thing that's really, I think like I'd love to talk about right now is really this thing called the Uncertainty Project. And so it's a community where we have a bunch of like tools, a bunch of kind of musings and discussions about strategy, decision making. Because I think like one of the problems we have right now, especially inside these large organizations, I think actually for the betterment of humanity, we need to figure out how to make decisions in a way that allows us to move forward in some way, right? Allows us to actually not even resolve differences, but actually talk about them in a way that is helpful. And so I think decision making is one of those things that's very interesting to me and overlaps with the future of like automation of decision making and the way that we try to, I guess, do a better job working together. And so the Uncertainty Project, we have a newsletter. I think we're at like 1,500 people at this point. And we're going to start doing like more workshops and talks and stuff like that. But it's really just like a great resource if you want to like find out about a bunch of different things, like the randomization discussion that we were kind of having a little bit earlier. Like I've done talks and talk a lot about these like randomization kind of utilities inside of decision making. And so I've written an article there about how I use randomization into decision-making processes and things like that. And so, anyways, that's what I would love for people to check out. And I'd also love to be connected on LinkedIn or if people are still going to Twitter and X when this comes out, I'm on there as well. But I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn and definitely just chat about any of these things. I mean, I probably showed you only the ones that I actually showed as far as card decks. It's probably like a quarter of my card deck set. And that doesn't include like RP, like role-playing game card decks and like other types of things like that. So anyways, I'm a huge fan of these types of techniques like you are. And so anyways, I'd love to connect on that. There's not really a great community that's huge on this type of thing, but I keep on finding like little pockets of people that have this. But I have like a whole plastic bin
Sure.
where I keep all this stuff.
And again, that's called the Uncertainty Project.
Yeah, that's right.
And the idea here, this goes back to your good chaos, where you're trying to, what's the word?
Yeah, well, and trying to get
the uncertainty rather than to eliminate it.
Yeah, that's fair too. Is that like, so it's the uncertaintyproject.org. And I think the reason why we called it the Uncertainty Project is that I think people, especially in the tech world, feel very certain about the future, right? Like they have a roadmap or a plan. They tend to be very directed. There's like one right way to do things. We're all super smart. So the way we think about things must be the right way to do things. And I think I want people to question that. And I want people to allow for uncertainty. Now, it doesn't mean everybody deals with uncertainty in the same way, right? But I want people to consider more uncertainty because I think maybe this is like the mission, right? For me, is that I think some of the worst things in the world happen when people are very certain about something, right? They're certain about the situation. They're certain about another person. They're certain about that other country. Whatever it is, it's about the certainty you have about someone else rather than allowing for curiosity, allowing for like compassion and other things that allow you to, I think, in some way, not just think you're the one right way to do things.
Right. I have a little piece of advice which I got from Tim Leary, which is you're only as young as the last time you changed your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So learning how to change your mind sounds like it's an optimal thing for this Uncertainty Project.
That's right, and I don't think we should be scared of that, right? Like if you are wrong, like product management as a practice, I kind of think of product management's motto as we are wrong today, we just don't know how yet.
Well, it sounds a lot like the lessons from Ed Catmull's book Creativity Inc., which was about Pixar. He says every single movie sucks. The start that
exactly,
and their entire project management
that's right,
is to unsuck the movie.
That's right.
It says inevitably it sucks. The first version of it is just terrible. It doesn't matter what it is, and their job is to try to make it suck less.
That's
as they
right.
go
Well,
along.
and that's the brain trust meeting, right? That you're talking about, where it's somewhere in the range of like 30 to 70%, right? It's not like brand new where there's no decisions, and it's not like so done that we're not gonna make any changes, right? It's kind of in that realm. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's another, maybe this isn't really another tool recommendation, but maybe it's like there's a group online that's called like 1 page 1 hour, and you can kind of look it up. But it's this pledge that you make that if you're ever going to write anything where you work with other people, you only do 1 page at the most, and you only spend 1 hour doing it. And the reason why that is valuable inside my world is that when I first got started in product management, I wrote like a 600-page specification about how to do meeting requests for Hotmail and MSN Calendar and Outlook and Exchange. And with Lotus Notes was around at that point too. And so that's crazy. Like I probably you should not as a PM get to that point that you have the 600-page spec without talking to people. You should write 1 page in 1 hour and then talk to people. And so anyways, I love that story about the brain trust too, because you're absolutely right. We want to talk about the work. We want to talk about the work direction and the work as something that is actually kind of a thing in itself, right? And maybe that's why I think the book about creativity by Rick Rubin, I was just kind of listening to, was really interesting to me. Is that I guess I think a lot about like embodied experience of creativity, like how does it feel to do something that's creative? But he talks about more about that the work has to exist out there, and that work is separate from you. And I think there's some interesting things about that. So I've been just trying to like process and think about like how does that change the way we talk about these things that we build and make, right? And so anyways, I totally agree though. Like we should be less certain and we should change our mind more. Absolutely.
Well, so that's called again the uncertaintyproject.net.
Org.
Okay.
.org. Yeah.
.org.
Yeah.
Head over there for more of uncertainty. And Chris, it's really been a pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for these really cool tools. I really appreciate it. And our readers will as well. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a real honor. I mean, again, I've been following you for a very long time. I still have a stack of first issue Wired magazines and what technology wants and things like that. And so anyways, I've just always been a big fan, and I love this community too around tools. So thank you for doing this. I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay. And have a good year too.
Yeah, have a good year.
Alrighty. This year, our Cool Tools blog will be 20 years old, which means we've been posting something new every day for 20 years. It's only possible because of the very engaged and knowledgeable readers and listeners like yourself. You've kept this place going, and we are very grateful for you. With this idea of 20 years in mind, we decided to try an experiment this year, and I'm inviting our guests and listeners to join me on our Cool Tool Show and Tell, which is the program that you're listening to right now. So if you feel you'd make a good guest on this podcast and have 4 uncommon tools that you'd like to share with us, please sign up on our form on the website, and we'll see about inviting you. You must be comfortable talking on a video, and you need to have some tools that you can show. We record on, as you know, on Zoom. We do a YouTube version, a video version of it, as well as an audible version. Fill out the form if you're interested, and list your 4 cool tools, and we'll see if there's a good fit. The applications aren't guaranteed in any way, and we're looking at tools that are new to us and appropriate tools, and whether the times will work for you. So we're really interested in hearing from people all over the world, not just in the US, although the tools have to be available online, easily available online. And if you are a longtime listener, you kind of know what the definition of our tools are. They're very broad. They can be anything that's handy, from something in the kitchen to something you use to travel, to a workshop, to something professional that we may not know about. We're really interested in things that we don't know anything about. So this is an open invitation. We'll give it a try. If you think you make a good guess for this podcast, fill out the form. There'll be a link somewhere on our website, and we look forward to chatting with you. Thank you.